Hey everyone, Zach here. Just so you know, this is my first podcast. I don't do the social media thing really, other than share funny memes that I come across. And in on that same topic, my wife and I, much like most couples, we like to share reels or funny things with each other because we have a similar sense of humor, even if it didn't start out that way. We blended together and we find commonalities there. But so one quick story that I wanted to share is that this was probably about a month, maybe a little more ago. But I came across a reel where a guy was giving his assessment of two autistic persons out on a date. And the comical thing about the date was that the male on the date stated some interests that he had or things that he liked and was just like upfront, like no smooth intro, no.
I'm pretty sure it was Batman and Train. I think
Either way,
Batman and Trains.
Doesn't matter what it was, but he threw a couple things out there that he was very interested in, passionate about, something really important to him. And likewise, she replied with, I don't like any of those things. They're terrible. They very quickly, without any emotional anger or frustration towards the other person, was just like, this isn't gonna work out. Peace out. I'm out of here, right?
Right.
So I found that very entertaining. I thought it was funny. I shared it with Chelsea because it was funny. And we talked about it later on. But that's kind of leading us into what we kind of want to talk about today, which is just no two persons are alike. We are different. We are uniquely made. And a lot of times in marriage or even in an early relationship, before we even get to the marriage aspect, we don't always acknowledge or even see because we're blinded by other things that
other things. What are those other things we talked about? We talked about this morning and I said, okay, so what was it that first caught your eye? And you said,
I said you were hot. So
right. And then we talked a little bit and we shared the same values and beliefs. And that's all we needed, right?
One extra note here is Chelsea came up to me and we started this conversation with, oh, well, we have lots of things in common. We're very much alike. And I said, I don't think we are. I listed about 8 things that are, I don't want to say prioritized, but strong interest and things that take up my time outside of work and normal family and going to church that I find interested in, that Chelsea really has zero interest.
It's true. So he started going through this list of, he's like, I like lots of people and you don't.
You like to read.
I like to read. I like art.
So I noted some very crucial aspects of we are very different.
Yeah. So, you're a night owl. I'm a morning person. You're very detail oriented. I'm very go with the flow, which works out when we're planning like traveling, because like we have a trip coming up and he's planned every detail down to almost a second. Oh, come on.
Don't kill me.
Included with maps and graphs and diagrams too, I'm sure.
I'm an organized person.
Yes, you are. But I'm not. All I need to know is when are we leaving and when are we getting back, so I have the time frame, and then he's got all the details in the middle that I'm along for the ride. So it works out in that sense.
So yeah. And that almost made us realize that it just brings you back to the different stages of where you are in your relationship. And we know that there may be several different people out there watching, listening to this, and you're in your own unique stage. But it made us realize that, as you progress on through a relationship, problems may arise and that you didn't initially either acknowledge was even there, which always may have been there, or just a problem that quite hadn't surfaced that may. And we definitely experienced that as we progressed, because there's stages of every relationship and marriage.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times I think we're attracted to those differences at first because they balance us out. So, I mean, most people who are disorganized are very attracted to someone who's very organized because it balances us out as a person. And I think though, as we've been married longer, those differences, once the honeymoon phase has faded and now we have a realistic vision of our marriage, those differences can't like totally break us. You know, if that's all we're focusing on is how different we are, and then we slide into this season of we must have married the wrong person, we're mismatched, you know, we can't make this work. But then as I've seen this, that, you know, people will get divorced and they'll get remarried and they have the same problems happening again. And so it just goes to show that Zach and I, when we were talking about this morning, you had made a good point about our conversations of, you know, if we talk about this a lot because we're military, so death is always a real conversation for us. But if I were to die or he were to die, you know, and I thought you brought up a really good point.
Yeah, and that
which seems harsh for other people. Well, just, you know.
Yeah, and I always try to throw a comical aspect towards everything. But I've always told Chelsea, like, in addition to having a will, like who gets what or whatever, if there's some specific things that, you know, you have in your last will and testament, I also need you to include a list of 5 women you approve of, that, you know, I could get along with and share my values and my faith, that, you know, I could immediately start reaching out to. Hey, I have 5 children who are beautiful. I can't do this on my own. I will die, and at least I'll starve because I can't feed myself.
You'll starve.
I
Or
rely
Taco
on
Bell
yeah,
here,
or my fast food bill will be
Right.
Exponentially surpassing my income.
Right.
But you know, we talked about getting back to the core of it, is that there's certain things that you can get past with another individual in your relationship, that are just, I don't want to say trivial because they're important to each and every person.
Right, because they're who we are.
Yeah, they
right?
are. They're important, but they're not those core things. And so that brings us to some of the things that Chelsea and I talked about. Well, because even though we are so different, but we've learned to complement each other and also find and put ourselves out there to maybe discover that there's an interest that your spouse or your significant other has that maybe you didn't realize before, that you can both share enjoyment in. That the core ones are really important. So Chelsea and I have kind of come up with 3 things that we feel are really important to have with your spouse if you're going to have a long-term successful marriage with. And not to say that it's impossible if you don't have these, but we feel that they're important enough to say that there'd be some significant challenges if you don't. First and foremost, as I expressed in, you know, one of our intro videos, was a common faith. If one shares a different religion than the other that has some very differing doctrines, that's going to be a challenge. And thankfully, Chelsea and I have been paired together, and we share that same faith and love for God, and passion of bringing glory to his kingdom, even through our failures. I mean, we learn through success and failure. And if we can't bring glory to God's kingdom through those, or we can't grow together in our faith, as parents, I mean, we'll stop learning when we die, to be good parents. Right. So anyways, our faith, our core values and ethics too. And that sometimes one could argue those are rooted in your faith, most definitely, but there are some other aspects to your values or your ethics where you might share a more societal based belief differing from your partner. That's negotiable depending on what it is, but at the same time, they should be very, very common and closely aligned. And then, just because I've been rambling, what's the other one? I can't recall.
I don't know. You said 3 and I was only thinking of 2, but but I think like that's the point that we had talked about this morning, that honestly, if you're married.
Oh, I know what it is.
What?
Sorry, I didn't mean
to. No, go ahead.
You obviously have to be attracted to the other person.
Sure.
That's what sparks every relationship. Yeah. Nobody says, you know, the first thing you acknowledge about somebody or that makes you want to pursue them is you're probably physically attracted to that person. So that was the other aspect that we talked about. So
though I do think attractiveness can grow depending on.
This is very true.
You know, and
I
think
should grow a whole lot more
over time. Obviously, we both get old, we're gonna get wrinkly, you know, our bodies are gonna change over the years somewhat. And you know, so I think it definitely comes down to those core values and beliefs.
But love sprouts from those 3 things, I think. I could be attracted as heck to somebody, going on a date with them, and if they're spouting off things that just cut me to the core and are not aligned with my values or my faith,
Right.
I don't care how attractive you are, just like shallow hell, I'm probably not going on a second date. In fact, most assuredly. And I know the same is for you.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. I think that the bottom line is that whoever you're married to today, it's so, because when we looking back at our journey, I mean, we essentially we got married, things were not as we expected them to be, and we basically treaded water for at least 5 years.
Yeah, sat in that,
nearly drowning multiple times.
and you tell yourself, oh well,
It's just the way it is.
This is expected.
I guess.
This is normal, right?
Right.
know?
And it's like we knew the concepts of marriage that we wanted, but we were lacking. How do you actually walk that out every single day? You know, and just, I think it's such a different way of thinking from the world, and it's so easy to fall into focusing on the differences, focusing on the fact that we would be better off with somebody else, like it would work with somebody else, it's not working here, instead of rooting yourself in the marriage that you have and doing whatever it takes to figure this dang thing out.
Yeah.
And not just to like sit back and have an okay marriage or even a good marriage, but to really have an exceptional marriage that you're excited. Like, I can't wait till our kids. Like, we've got plans and we're excited. And I think so often marriages are kid centric. It's so focused on the kids. And I did this in a lot of our early years. You know, I completely ignored him when the kids came along. And I don't know that it was necessarily intentional. I think that it's just the default that happens when you don't know otherwise to be proactive in that. I never had anyone tell me, like, don't let your kids come before your spouse. Well, I don't think, like,
yeah, to add on to that, you get caught up in the worldly expectations.
Yeah.
We're
fighting this now. Our kids are not in sports yet, darn it. And we're guarding our time like little Nazis.
And I will, one anecdote, if you're not really familiar with Chelsea and I, we got married very young.
Yeah.
We got married at 21 years.
22.
You were just 22 by a day. Okay.
By a day.
So we were
That's a funny story.
Very young. Yeah, sure. We'll get into those things. But because of that, you know, some of your biggest growth as an individual comes in your 20s. I mean, her and I were just both recent college graduates for a lot of those younger years of our marriage. Mm-hmm. You're not the most financially stable. You're probably recovering from financial debacles. No, but God kept us afloat. I look back on our finances 10 plus years ago and I'm like, honey, I don't know how we paid the bills.
Because I specifically remember months when I was telling Zach, like, we're $300 short, and all of a sudden he'd get a $300 bonus at work. So God totally covered our butts. He sustained us. It's from going bankrupt. Yeah.
We're much better off now, only from learning from other people who, you know, had wisdom in those areas. Nonetheless, you know, we struggled. But in the same way that Chelsea expressed and, you know, was vulnerable in saying, I denoted a lot of my time to kids. I was working 14-hour days, and in addition to my military service and my civilian job. I mean,
but that's normal, right?
Yeah, but yeah, we were not.
Mom invests in the kid. The dad goes off to work, and
like I said, stereotypical worldly where we were at.
And we wondered why we were drowning,
or not. No growth. We were sliding down into the abyss.
We were definitely going in the wrong
direction. So one of the things that I didn't want to skip over, because, you know, I know we're following an outline.
We have
Thanks,
an outline.
Chelsea.
We have notes.
I know.
Just to keep us on track, because we're talkers and we can like totally go down.
So anyways, one thing I want to ensure that we hit home and emphasize to anyone who's taking the time to listen is clearly, I think we've expressed that we had our share of differences. And it wasn't just interests, it was personality types. Ways that each one of us felt encouraged, each way.
The way we think.
Sure.
The way we talk, the way we express or don't, that's me, express our feelings.
So I'm not wrapping this up by any means, but one takeaway is I want to ensure everyone understands that if you're acknowledging where you're currently at, that you and your significant other have some very differing ways of thinking, life, interests, fill in the blank.
basically anything outside of those core
Sure,
values and faith.
yes, and we're really
right?
talking to married couples here, so we know there's a level of commitment involved. We're not talking about, I just went on a date with somebody and we're different. I gotta stick it out. But you know, don't get focused on those differences. Learn how Chelsea's beautiful characteristics that God gave her that are drastically different than mine complement us as a couple and as parents. It's apparent in both of those situations about how we've edified each other and been able to move forward. But it doesn't happen unless we talk about it.
Yeah.
So
we're going to be talking a lot in future episodes about communication skills and the different things we've learned and how we've developed those, because everyone just says talk more, but if you don't know how to communicate effectively, it's just going to leave you more frustrated. And then if you don't know what your actual fighting style is, right? Because we have we're going to get into all that later. It's just frustrating because you're stuck in these cycles, these trenches of coming up against the same issues and not being able to work through them because you're saying the same things, but they're in different languages. And we've just come to know that we speak completely different languages. He's very rational and I'm very emotional. And I also don't express my emotions well. So that's that's something I've been working on. But, you know, just to reiterate that even if you feel very different from your spouse, that's actually a good thing. Because if we were all the same, first of all, it would be super boring. And can you imagine if we were both extremely emotional or we were both extremely,
that'd be like both of us being addicted to cocaine,
right?
We can't help
like
each
how
other.
are you going to help each other because you don't have our shared weaknesses? We love to go out to eat, so well, we have issues there, but,
yeah. But my logical mind takes over and says, okay, only this number of times or this, but
right, exactly. You know, so differences are actually a good thing to lean into. And so we want to wrap it up here. And because we are faith-based, we want to leave you with a verse that was really powerful for us. And I listened to this recently through another podcast, and it was Joel 2:25. It says, I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army which I sent among you. Now, I want to say we're taking this completely out of context, but I think that when you take just the first part of this and apply it to the years of our marriage where we were drowning and honestly didn't like each other at all, many times. I mean, it was pretty bad at times. And like, I look at those years as the years the locusts have eaten, and God saying that he is going to restore those to us. And it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect at walking out our marriage, just that we need to be committed to growing and to honoring God through our marriage. So then we wanted to share the big takeaway with you and then 2 actionable steps. Do you want to share
sure
the takeaway? If you can
by
read
the way,
my scratch hand.
That's not completely out of context. I know
Not
it's
exactly.
very important to be in contextually aware when you're
Right.
reading scripture, but at the same time, God's word is chock full of restoration.
Right. Well, I didn't want anyone to think like, oh, God took these years from my marriage. Not at all. We sinful
Not
people
my
did that.
sin or selfishness,
right.
All right, so sure, I'll share the takeaway here. There comes a point in every marriage where differences are amplified, feelings wane, and commitment becomes more important than anything else. So that's the one thing that needs to be the root. And sometimes we fail at that too, but nonetheless, despite those differences and despite the feelings that sometimes waver, that is what's truly important.
Once the honeymoon fades in, then the feelings wane. And that's where commitment becomes the most important
but
thing.
There's many more other phases.
There are.
All right, so here's some 2 actionable steps that Chelsea and I wanted to share with you. Number 1, own where you are. So I want to share one story with this particular one. Chelsea and I, as I hope most couples do, they look for ways to get better. And prior to a previous marriage conference that we did or class, we had a opportunity to kind of look at some very common areas that marriages struggle. I mean, you can list those top ones: intimacy, communication, X, Y, Z. Again, fill in the blank. Rate these on a scale of 1 to 10 on how you feel you're doing. And I took a very analytical approach because that's just my personality. And I said, honey, I think we have a 69%. We are just, we got some pretty strong areas and some pretty average areas. And this is where I think we're at. And she's like,
a D plus. Boy, I'm celebrating it.
After 6 years of college. But what I wanted to express in my what I thought to be a very honest assessment of where I thought we were as a couple, in our marriage and in our family, it was kind of a collective assessment. I said, honey, I feel like even those areas where we're good, we could still be better. We can really improve and be.
And that's not what I was focusing on. I was just thinking, oh, we're pretty good in all these areas.
So that's a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
And
yeah, not even close.
So she disagreed at first, and not that I'm trying to put any feathers in my cap, but
he was right.
Chelsea and I, through that class and other mentors and really wise folks who, much like us, have gone through struggles and learned some things. We took what they have learned and what they were teaching, and we found out that even my score may have been high.
That's true.
Okay,
that
so
very true.
That's step one, is own where you are.
Yeah, just having a realistic picture and accounting of how well are you communicating, how well are you moving through each of those areas, so that you know where you're starting from, so you can get better, and you know where to focus.
And a lot of our focus on this too should be internal before it's really external.
Oh yeah, that's one thing we forgot to mention.
Well, I'm mentioning it now.
Staying in your circle, we forgot that one.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of the ways that you're going to be able to see some tangible improvement between you and your spouse is by looking at where you are inadequate, where you are able to improve, and love your spouse better, love your spouse more perfectly. Even if we can't get there, I know there's probably some football fans out there, but Vince Lombardi was key on that concept of, you might not always, you might not never ever achieve perfection. However, if you're always aiming and your goal is that, you're going to keep getting better. So
that's so true.
Yeah, really neat. So that's concept one, own where you are.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to add on to that too. Yeah. I know we're just in the actionable steps, the last part here, but with that, like staying in your circle, I think when we first started to really become aware of how bad our marriage was, and we were starting to work on it, and I didn't know the term staying in your circle then, but I quickly learned that the best way to get my husband to do what I wanted to do was to not do anything but work on myself, and I always tell wives, like, get on your knees and pray so the Holy Spirit can punch your husband in the face. All right. It's much more powerful than anything that you're ever going to do. And,
it was more effective than screaming at me.
It was, because honestly, when you try to change your spouse, you're going to push them away every single time. But when you work on yourself and making yourself better, and like Zach just said, showing up and trying your best to love your spouse perfectly, that is going to attract them to change so much more than anything you could ever do or say.
Or at least position them to the point of change.
Right. Like it's almost like it cultivates the soil and encourages them to also start growing as well, Yeah. So then
you share the last one, because it's
number 2. Yes. So the actionable steps. The second actionable step is to take an interest in something your spouse enjoys. We have very different interests. He loves sports. I just like snacks.
She loves Super Bowl parties.
I love going to games for the social interaction and fun and snacks, but like the sport itself is not so fun for me. He loves working in his garage on different woodworking things. I'd rather read a book, or it's
kind of a one-man activity, I believe.
It's true. But in those early stages of us really leaning into working on our marriage, there were very small things that I did, but he had a Harley. I'd never been on it. And okay, so this is my story I want to share with you, that the first time I got on his Harley with him, I think we were going 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I was screaming because we were going too fast. And I still remember, and it's this vivid, like seared into my brain memory of how fast the road was going past me. And I thought I was going to die. And I'm like, slow down. And he's like, honey, we're going 20. And I'm like, no way. We are going so much faster.
I think you had a backseat driver before.
Wait till you get on the back of a Harley and you have zero control. I've gotten better over the years. It's, so much better. But
Yeah.
I think that was like the first physical step for me of like investing in something that he was interested in and he loved doing. And also took the control out of my hands and let him lead and let him be the one in control, in charge.
Yeah, there was some metaphorical benefit in that.
Yeah, like,
Not
girl, get on that Harley.
not just, we're going fast, but Chelsea wanting to be in control, completely giving her safety, our 3 kids at the time's livelihood, going forward if we were to die in some tragic crash.
Yeah.
She really had to be vulnerable and trust everything pretty much to be the operator. So
yeah, it really was like the perfect metaphor for the stage we were at in life and me giving up control of everything. Because at the time I was running the finances, I was running the house, I was taking care of the kids. He was going to work, and in my mind that was all he was doing. And like it really was like symbolic of me letting go of everything and letting my husband lead the way God intended him to lead. Yeah. And it was terrifying at first, but
did you just expose another episode? Maybe we'll do something on finances.
Yeah, we're going to talk about finances in the future because Zach is an Excel master. And the other part of that was, he enjoyed going to the bar to have a drink, and I don't know why, but I was stuck in that like, ooh, we can't go hang out at bars.
And this was 10 years ago again. Yeah. We're still in our 20s.
We were young.
Now we go to the bar very rarely just to escape the children, and we leave at 9.
And like, and it was so funny because back then, again, it was some weird thing in my brain that like, well, I can't go to a bar. Bars, like, you, like, and so it was something like really uncomfortable for me, but it was something he enjoyed doing. And I actually had a friend who encouraged me, go do what your husband enjoys doing and spend that time with him. And it really made a huge difference. It was such a small thing, but to invest and take an interest in something that he liked, just like our pastor back in Pennsylvania used to say, to do everything it takes short of sin to get the gospel forward, right? Yeah. Like I took that approach with my husband. I will do everything short of sin to win the heart back of my husband. And that's really what propelled us forward into our first steps of truly rebuilding our marriage after God had restored it.
Yeah.
So that is it. Any last words?
No, I'm looking forward to chatting more.
That's right.